Very good. Good evening or good afternoon or good night, wherever you are, because I know we've got some people from all over the world, and certainly from Asia and from Canada, which is so exciting. And I can't tell you how excited I am, actually a little nervous. I was talking to Peter and Hugh a couple of days ago, and this evening reminds me slightly of a time when Peter and I were having dinner together in London a few years back, and I was rang by Anthony Barton to say, what are you doing for dinner tomorrow? And he said, I said that, well, I'm having dinner with Peter Vinding-Diers. And he said, oh, can I join you? And he flew all the way over from Bordeaux just to be with Peter. This is Anthony Barton of Langua and Learville Barton. And I suspect it's going to be a little like this evening, insofar as you have two of the greatest luminaries in the world of wine. And as I said in my note to you, I'm the bag carrier and slightly piggy in the middle, and you're here to listen to these two extraordinary people. And I might just say a few words about them. Hugh, of course, doesn't really need any introduction at all. He's probably the most influential person in the world of wine ever. I grew up in awe of him. All of us will know that extraordinary work, still a work of genius, perhaps the greatest work of genius in the world of wine, the World Atlas of Wine, which put together Hugh's faultless, seamless prose, which manages to conjure up in words what it is almost impossible to do unless you're actually drinking what he's talking about, and to ally that with, of course, some of the most beautiful maps ever produced. And that's just one of dozens of books that he's written. And his stretch and influence in the world of wine, from his directorship of Château Latour for so many years up until 2003, his influence in Tokaj, his influence at Château de Langeras, which I suspect we'll talk about in due course, his Condé Nast experience in the world of editorship was, I mean, I could just go on and on. Everybody knows you. And he's also one of the few people in the world of wine, not enough in my view, who've actually been honored by the Queen with the Order of the British Empire, which I think is extraordinary. And I daren't call him a friend, but he's a demigod as far as I'm concerned, and a kind and generous and inspirational man. Somebody I can call a friend, Peter Vinding-Diers, who is also the most extraordinary character. I was reading his book, which by the way, I really should mention, because I speed read it. Peter, you'll be very impressed. I speed read it in one night, and it's that good. And I always think that great books, you can hear the author speaking, and that it is you speaking, and the story that you tell and the life that you've led. I mean, it makes empire builders look like pygmies. It's quite extraordinary, and we'll touch on Hugh. This is a conversation between Hugh and Peter. We'll touch on some of the extraordinary things that you've done, but we've worked together as well as being friends. And to this day, what you did at Château de Langeras in Bordeaux, never mind what you did at Raoul and getting it into the Union de Grand Cru against all the odds, never mind what you've done in Hungary, in Italy, of course in Sicily, which we'll come on to later. What you did, I think, in Bordeaux was remarkable. And to this day, I don't think we've ever had a better white Bordeaux, a greater white Bordeaux at its price point than Notre Dame de Langeras. And I know that there's at least one person here who has still got some of that extraordinary wine, and it is still drinking beautifully, which I think is remarkable. I should also perhaps say a little vote of thanks, because one of your great qualities, and I might just, if I remember, say a few words at the end of this, because people are here to listen to the two of you. I think one of your extraordinary qualities is how you inspire other people, but also are selfless in introducing them. And I owe a personal debt of thanks for you introducing to Corney Barrow Peter Sisek, your nephew of diminutive Pingas, Alvaro Palacios in Pereira, Andrea Franchetti in Tuscany, and the number of people you've inspired is just legendary. and I think that's extraordinary. So this book is wonderful. It's a terrific read. I think what Académie du Vin have done, and they've also published Hugh's terrific book, which is, of course, The Story of Wine, that's just out again. What's that lovely catchphrase, Hugh? I think it's something about from Noah to now, which is brilliant. I think what the Académie du Vin have done has been extraordinary, because these are really, really cracking reads. And if you want to click onto their link, I don't know whether they're going to share it later. And there's some catchphrase, some password. I think it's Viking 5, and you'll get a discount off it. But it's a wonderful read, and it's also, I'm a child for these things. It's got the most wonderful number of photographs, and I think tonight will be about people as well as about wine, and it is full of people. The book is I think a triumph. Absolutely wonderful. So there it is. Hugh, who's temporarily disappeared, but Peter, who definitely not, who is in Sicily, by the way, at his marvelous property, Monte Carubo, that we've just started taking the wines off. And in fact, I think they're about to arrive, Peter, in 2-3 weeks' time, which is exciting. Vineyard, and you'll, I'm sure, say a little bit about that. And this is your own personal property, which I think you bought in 2005.
Right. Yes.
And it's so exciting. And I might just say 20 seconds on Sicily, because I gave a very boring talk at my club last year about great wine myth and or reality. And one of the things I said was, I quoted the Côte d'Or and Sicily. And I said that Sicily was famous 1,000 years before the Dutch drained the mosquito-infested swamps of the Medoc and made great wine in the 17th century. And the history and tradition of great Sicilian wine is something that Peter has been reinventing, and that's perhaps one of his other qualities. But anyway, that's for another story and another time. Peter, it's fantastic that the three of us are together, and I'm just going to listen, because I know I'm going to learn an awful lot in the next hour. Oh, I might finally say, questions, Q&A, you've got a little icon at the bottom of your screens, all of you. So if you have any questions, which we'll take at the end, please tap them in there, and we'll pick them up and regurgitate them to both Peter and Hugh at the end of the session. And I've got one question which I'd love to ask, if I'm allowed to. Hugh, over to you, boss.
Well, Adam, that was terrific. Thank you so much. I'm going to introduce Peter, but I thought a good way of introducing him would actually be just to read some of the foreword that I wrote to his book. Because when you're writing, you have to compress things into as few words as possible. So here it goes. Peter has shot like a comet through the wine skies over the past 50 years. People all over the world of wine have looked up suddenly to see this mysterious light. You don't expect a comet to have a memory, let alone to remember precisely what he drank, or what ate and drank what, or with whom, with what repercussions, half a century later. So perhaps Vinding is not a comet, but something more like a highly intelligent, hugely well-read, scientifically savvy, emotionally charged, loyal and mercurial human being, descended from upper-class Vikings, and married to a tiny English lady with honey in her veins. The results are 5-star on all fronts. Would the memoirs of such a person be worth reading? Silly question. Would they be reliable? Nobody's perfect. Would they give you a unique account of wine, winemaking, wine characters, wine selling, wine intrigue, and lots of enviable encounters over decade after decade? They would indeed. And in addition, some of Peter's greatest friends share their memories in this book in tributes that set the scene for each chapter. I've lived with this phenomenon for most of these 5 decades. Peter and I have dug and spun, labored and laughed on one wine front after another. It's been costly, but so is the fast track at the best address in any calling. Peter. So I'm going to start by just saying the book is an autobiography which I first saw when Peter told me he was starting to write it in Danish, and it was published in Danish 2 years ago, I think.
Oh, yes.
So I said, I'm dying to read it. So he said, right, I'll get some translated. And he sent me a Google translation. Now, Google translations of Danish have you falling off your chair with laughter. So I was prodding him to go and do it in English. And the English he's done it in is really remarkable. Not because he has the slightest trouble with English, but because it's such a great story to tell, and he tells it with wit and fluency. It's a fabulous book. I'm absolutely in love with it. It's beautifully produced. I'm going to give you a glimpse of its cover. There you are. That's the man. You can recognize him. And now I'm just going to ask him one or two questions. And I think that I'm going to start with where we first met, which was at Chateau Louden in the Medoc, which I had a family connection to Louden through Judy, my wife. And Peter was hired to make wine there at just about the moment when Judy and I were going there. We were on holiday, we met Peter, the young winemaker. In fact, Peter, that's not exactly what you did, was it?
Well, the original plan was that Louden would put me on a satellite chateau somewhere, and I was supposed to run that. But in the early 70s, the economy was not all that brilliant. And so I remained at Louden as their production director. It was something I had absolutely no idea about. It was a huge cellar with the négociant business. And so it's something I really had to get on with very quickly. I remember we had a brand new bottling line put in. And of course, things would go wrong, and it would go wrong the day that all the big bosses came from London. And so I told Martin Bamford, who was in charge of it, I will put a scout by the door, and as soon as he sees you, we will start the line running. You have 5 minutes to get through the hall of bottling, and then go out and look at the river, and there you will stay for another 5 or 6 minutes before you come back in again, and the line will be running. And the whole thing went like perfect. and nobody actually found out that the line was defect.
But you started, Peter, you knew about cellars and so on from South Africa.
Oh, yes.
They really started.
Yes, it started at the Experimental Research Institute in Stellenbosch, and then for 5 years I made the wine at Rustenburg, which was then Skumgesicht, a wonderful Cape Dutch farm with Jersey cows and a few vines, and we made the wine in the old cellars, which were simply wonderful. It was a lovely part of my life.
I remember visiting Rustenburg, not when you were there, but much later, and meeting a chap who I think you learned a lot from, Reg Nicholson.
Yes, my great mentor. Yes, Reg was...
he was a great source of understanding about South African wine. And then Bordeaux.
And then Bordeaux. And actually, when I got the telegram from Louden, so would I join them, I took Reg out in the vineyard, and he was just about to retire and was to take his job. And I said, Reg, what shall I do? And he said, you must go. And I would say I was relieved in one way, because if he'd said, no, you must stay, I would have stayed. But, I held him in great esteem. And so it was a magic moment. He said, a young man should always go through Bordeaux. It's one of the most wonderful things anybody in wine could do, and it was such an encouragement.
I remember you had an extraordinary Hungarian mentor in a way in South Africa.
Oh yes,
Remember-
yes.
who-
When I worked, in fact, when I worked at the Experimental Institute, he was my boss in the Vineyard,
Yeah.
and I learned enormous amount of things from him. He was highly cultured, spoke 5 or 6 languages, and wrote his doctorate in Afrikaans. But he was Hungarian originally, and he is a godfather to one of my children. And he was a wonderful person, because both Reg and he never put on the teacher to me. They let me find out about things on my own, and they were guiding me along. And I think that's wonderful, especially for somebody who's stubbornly himself, like I unfortunately have always been.
Peter, I have a feeling that Pongratz also encouraged you, or it formed a little bit of your character, which has been prominent from time to time, which is of going your own way. I mean, he was the man, as I understand it, who introduced Chardonnay to South Africa when the government tried to prevent it.
Yes.
He actually smuggled Chardonnay cuttings into South Africa when the government said, they may be white, but we don't want them.
Yeah, it's true, absolutely. And he was the first to do green grafting. I mean, he was highly intelligent, thought about what he did, an enormous inspiration. Because later in my life, when I've had a problem with a wine or that wouldn't ferment or so on and so on, I've tried to find the answer, not by looking directly into the problem, by looking at the problem from other angles. And that has helped me enormously. He was one of the ones who taught me to look at that. And I'm forever grateful to him, miss him enormously.
So you're about to say elementary, my dear Watson, because that was exactly the Sherlock Holmes approach, wasn't it? So in Bordeaux, I mean, you started at Loudun, as I said, but then came the opportunity of making wine at Chateau Raoul in the Grave, which nobody had heard of at the time, quite frankly. I mean, a good vineyard in a good area, but underperforming. And then, well, you're going to tell us a little bit about it, but I'm going to bring up the subject of Len Evans.
Yes.
I expect the name Len Evans rings a bell for some of us tonight. He was really Mr. Wine in Australia. He was a man who certainly didn't suffer fools gladly, who was accustomed to getting his own way in everything. But he didn't entirely with Peter, because he and Brian Crozer tried to tell Peter how to make Bordeaux, and Peter wasn't having any. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that, Peter?
I mean, Brian Crozer was the man who taught me to make white wine. There's absolutely no question about that. And he had this brilliant idea that he would put the must at -2 degrees until it settled down on its own. And then we would keep all the fruit in the must. But when it came to fermented, I insisted we use a local yeast. And so we went into Bordeaux and got agar plates and a Pasteur loop, and I found my old microscope. And we actually found what kind of yeast we had on the property. And there were about 5 yeasts, and 3 of them were not very interesting on their own. And then 2 of them were quite good. And so we brewed those up in small glass jars. And after a few days, we begin to sniff. And Susie my wife said, number 2 is the best. And that was the birth of a world famous now yeast called R2. I gave Brian some of it when he left for Australia. He lent it to somebody who then had it done up commercially. And it has been an enormous commercial success, which unfortunately neither Brian or I ever saw a penny for. It doesn't really matter. We were not in it for the money, I don't think. Brian was ecstatic about it because it fermented out something he didn't believe that it could do. But of course it could, because all the yeast in Bordeaux ferments out. In fact, every property has its own yeast, so it has its own signature. And that also was something that nobody wanted to believe, but we actually proved it. I proved it in '85 with a fun experiment using the same white must, but 3 different yeasts. And the 3 different yeasts were unmistakable. Gave the character of the chateau they came from. Yeah. And I showed that to the Academy and to the Union de Grand Cru and to the great professor at the university who didn't believe it. And everybody had to swallow the spit because it was just so clear. I think I sent you some bottles of those.
And Peter, what were sorry to interrupt, Hugh, what were the 3 chateaux?
It was L'Anspage and Angloudet, because L'Anspage, because Jean-Michel Cazes was a great friend and so on. And there was also a little nostalgia left in that, because when I was young, my father bought a hogshead of L'Anspage that hadn't bottled in Copenhagen every year. But you know, L'Anspage was not at the price it is today, I may say. I mean, wines were not all that frightfully expensive then, which was good because it gave young people a chance of tasting real great wines, something they don't really have today, which I think is such a shame.
One of your followers in the white wine in the Grave was Denis Dubourdieu, wasn't he? Because yes. I mean, he sort of followed on from you in making people understand how good white Bordeaux and white Grave especially could be.
Absolutely.
Yes, and he and that died 2 years ago. But I still love his Clos Floridain, and I think that was your influence, and Brown Crozes too.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we made the first white under Brian's influence in '79, and Denis followed on in '80 to make his wines. The Répression de Fraude came and wanted to find out what sort of aromas I put in the wine, and it really was quite a revolution. And Denis Dubourdieu came and tasted those 3 wines, and he said, "You've got to be an idiot not to believe in this." And thereby he started the yeast laboratory at the university, where he then became the professor. And it took him 20 years to prove scientifically what I had proved already then by intuition, should we say.
So it was following that, was it, that Chateau Raoul became a member of the Union des Grands Crus?
Yeah, I think we already had been elected, but I was elected a fellow at the Academy the next day, which was very, I mean, that really was a wonderful moment. It's not often you get a letter like that in the door. And
I should also say that from turning Chateau Raoul from a pretty a Crus bourgeois into a member of the Union des Grands Crus was something extremely unusual. What other chateaus have been promoted in that way? Very few, if any. So this was because the winemaking was original, ingenious, but above all, because the wine was bloody marvelous. I wish I still had some. And you were also making Sauterre.
Yes.
Padua.
Arsac, yes.
This is in the 80s.
Yes.
In Basel, yes.
We started 81. I think we started in Barsac. That was a great challenge. Len Evans wanted to buy Chateau Yquem, but it wasn't for sale then. Then we tried Studio, which was for sale, but then they flew over. We had an agreement, and at the last moment, they upped the price with X million francs then. And Peter Fox, Len's, this wonderful person from Australia, who was the money bags, he said, now the new price, does that include the ducks in the pond or not? And then we left. and then he had a swim in the pool. He was an old water polo player for Australia. So he swam faster than anybody I've ever seen. And he jumped in the pool at Raoul, and he said, this is it, we keep this place. and then that was the way Raoul was actually bought. It was quite fun.
Well, obviously, your reputation as somebody who could sort out problems and spread very widely, because at some stage you went to South America.
Yes.
Originally to Chile, I think. And
Yes.
How did that come about?
Well, there were a group of friends who created something. This is much later. There is actually just 88, I think 89. They created something they called European Wine Company. And the idea was to have a chateau in Bordeaux, which happened by buying Chateau de Lagnasse, which was a lovely old place. Only 1 hectare of vines, I think. But then we planted some and had a lot of fun. It was a lovely place. It was a great challenge to create a vineyard from nothing. And it was a very cold part of the Gave. It was on the land, the big forests that go down to the Spanish border. The idea with a cold place was not so much to plant a red vineyard, but to plant a white vineyard. And I also thought in Bordeaux, if you had to exist and create something in Bordeaux, it would have to be white wine, because unless you own a Cru Classé, there wasn't really any room for you anywhere. And so we planted white, and we planted Semillon, which nobody wanted to hear about. And we planted a very odd bud, which is Sauvignon Gris.
Well, 20. Here's the fan club for Sauvignon Gris. I don't understand why it isn't much more planted.
I have no idea. Yes, absolutely.
I know one wonderful chateau in Entre-deux-Mers that just makes pure Sauvignon Gris. And believe me, it's a joy. It's got some of the Sauvignon Blanc character, but it's got more vinosity. It's got more heart in it.
Yes.
It's a splendid grape.
Yes, it's got lovely fruit, wonderful acidity, early ripener, which is very important in Bordeaux.
Yeah.
And no, we had a lot of fun with that. Daniel Catilla from Smedot Lafitte, he and I had a long conversation during a visit to Singapore. And when he came home, he planted 20%, and he said, "I've never looked back." So it is a wonderful blender.
So this was Landiras. You collected a tremendous fan club, I must say, at Landiras, and lots of people, including students and neophytes, turned up and learned a huge amount from you. There's all sorts of people around the wine trade. So, of course, Landiras, yes. That's where I learned to, I don't know, wash bottles if necessary. But it was a wonderful place to come. At some stage, then South America came into your life.
Yes, yes. So it was decided that a vineyard in Chile would be a good idea. And I must say, I didn't think it would be a very good idea, but I went down there, and they had more or less decided who it was going to be. It was going to be a polo player who was also a playboy and a lot of other things. He had this farm, this rundown farm down in Maule in San Javier, which is the 7th district or something like that, but far enough south to have an interesting climate for wine growing. And so we started there, and we moved the vineyards up the hillsides. But you know, South America, I have a lot of friends who've had farms in South America. They all end the same way. And so did this. They end up in the pocket of their partners or whatever. And either you live there full time, or you don't go into a joint venture with anybody in South America. I don't think so.
It took you a while to learn that lesson, because you also went to Argentina and Brazil.
Oh yeah, my son is a great. I lived in Argentina when I was a little boy from 5 to 7, but my son is a great one for Argentina, and Hans, he owns this place called Noemia, which makes absolutely wonderful wines. So he's at the right up in the top of wine, good wines in Argentina. And now he's married a girl there, so I don't know. He's supposed to take over here someday, but I'm trying to find out how that is going to happen. It's an awful long way, I can tell you.
Yes, indeed. Well, the flying winemakers are the ones who make wine in the Northern Hemisphere at the appropriate moment, and then they get another vintage in the Southern Hemisphere.
Yes.
It's a wonderful way to learn about wine and learn winemaking, is to do 2 vintages a year, when people who are stuck in one hemisphere just do one.
At one stage, I made Lanyards, then the one in Chile, and then there was still room to make the Tokai.
Well, you brought up Tokai, because this is a story that I'm going to just introduce this story, because Tokai in Hungary was the one great, acknowledged great wine, once the most expensive wine in the world in the late 18th, 19th centuries, which was stuck behind the Iron Curtain. When the communists took over, that was it. Nobody was going to take any trouble. Young people now have no idea how dreadful communism was. You couldn't live life to the full. You couldn't do what you wanted. All standards were absolutely lowered. And Tokai, from being this fabulous essence, just became a sweet, rather brown white wine that was shipped to Moscow or Kiev in tanker trains. But in the late 80s, it became clear that communism was on the skids. And one after another, the Soviet bloc countries started to give it up, led by Poland. And at that moment, Peter with some Danish friends, started to look at the situation and say, well, but wait a minute. We could resurrect. There could be a renaissance of what was once the world's greatest sweet wine, literally. And Peter and I talked, and we went together, and the revolution was in November 1989. We all remember it so clearly if we were around. By January 1990, we'd popped up in Hungary, sniffing around to see whether we could actually start another kind of revolution, which is exactly what happened. And do you want to say something about how we got started, Peter?
I don't know, but I just imagine from somebody who loves wine, the opportunity to bring back a fantastically famous wine to life was something that it was just too good to miss. Yeah. And it was a very tough battle, but I think we did it in the end. And I always liked a challenge, and so I was very happy that we actually managed to do this. And there were ups and downs, but in the end, in the end, we had the new government on our side. And that added an enormous amount of goodwill. And then all of a sudden, everybody jumped on the wagon, but it was fun.
It was fun, but on the human side, I always remember somebody told us when we started to go to Hungary, be very careful with Hungarians. They are the people who can go into a revolving door behind you and come out in front.
Yes, I think we have discovered that that is the truth.
True. But there was another, I just have to quote what to me is the greatest tasting note I've ever read, which was about Tokai. It was written by one of the, an Oxford Don, I don't know, 100 years ago. And he wrote in his diary, I tasted an Imperial Tokai, and it was so different from any other wine I've ever tasted. It was like seeing a new primary color. So I get that through your head.
Yes, that is wonderful. And
so 25 years later, the Royal Tokai Wine Company that we started is now doing very nicely, thank you.
Yes.
Getting investors in the first place was incredibly difficult because people said, well, you know, how long is it going to take to come good? 5 years, 10 years? And I said to people, it'll take 25 years. Yeah. And to my astonishment, it was 25 years after we founded it that it first made a profit.
Yeah, amazing, amazing.
Oh, you have to be dogged. So we've been, then you come to Italy, where this is another chapter where you go to Tuscany, and then on further south. What was the Tuscan connection?
Well, it was Andrea Franchetti who kindly invited us to stay in one of his houses on his estate. It was nice. Well, you can imagine a farmer like me surrounded by blue clay and the most extraordinary assortiment of people washed up on the coast of Tuscany. It wasn't really my cup of tea at all. So thank God I had a lot of jobs as a consultant. So we moved into a flat in Rome on the Tiber. It was just facing the Tiber and the Tiber Island and Trastevere on the other side. And that was wonderful. I loved Rome. It was a fantastic thing. And while we lived in Rome, Andrea Franchetti's uncle told me, listen, I can see that you're not very happy. You should go to Sicily. That place will make you happy. And I thought, he's mad. If I move to Sicily, there's no further place I can move to. I mean, that's the end. No. But we did. And it actually proved to be something wonderful. An island with 3,000 years of culture. And you feel it. Nobody gets drunk. There's no fights anywhere. Nobody fights here in this island. People are very polite. The people who work with us in the vineyard are very honest and very proud of what they do, which is another wonderful feeling. And so that very often I find them on my way up from the cellar where I've been working late, and they're still there. And I said, what are you doing? Well, we felt we wanted to finish this so we can start something else tomorrow. You know, that kind of mentality, where else does it exist? So
Peter, you to explain a little, you went to the right part of Sicily, if I dare say that.
Yeah.
The western end of Sicily might not have been such a good idea, rather than the mafia base. But you're near Syracuse, which is a different kind of culture altogether. And who may I ask who Franchetti's uncle is? Was he Beneventano? Is that?
Giorgio Franchetti was, first of all, he was a very rich man. He was a great collector of fine art. He lived in the most magnificent, wonderful old, he converted an old candle factory in Trastevere into something with his own courtyard and gardens. And, amazing man, highly intelligent and great fun to be with. He was very inspiring in many ways, and he had so many pictures that he had like a bookcase of them, and then his nephew would take them out. He would say, "Take out number 24," and then on an afternoon, one would sit there, sip a glass of wine, which I bought, and because there is this atrocious tradition in Rome that if you are somebody smart, you don't drink wine out of a wine glass, you drink it out of a tumbler. And this is so uncivilized. Never mind. So one would sit there holding on to the tumbler, and he would compose an afternoon where you saw one picture leading into the next. It was a wonderful experience. And I remember once we had lunch, and the man that helped him, because he was quite infirm after a horrible car accident. He went out of the room, and we were still sitting at table with one of these famous Italian painters, and discussing and talking, and suddenly we hear these beautiful tunes from an accordion coming out from the terrace, sort of further down, and all discussion stopped, all talk stopped, and just for a few moments we were in the south of Italy, Napolitani music coming in. And I swore then that I would do the same. And he said, "You see, Peter, you belong in the south, you don't belong here." And
everybody
Hugh, may I butt in, because there are so many questions coming in for Peter that we ought to try and deal with some of them, and you'll have to deal with them rapidly if that's possible. But I should just share two of your ex-workers. Charlie Merrick's just come in with a very nice message to you, and Justin Howard-Snyde, another luminary of the British wine trade, and one of your workers at Chateau de Londres, are saying it's obviously cold in Sicily because you've got a fire going, but that's wonderful. But the lots of questions. One which I think is a really
Adam,
interesting one.
Take Peter to where he is in Sicily, because everyone was heading for Mount Etna at that point.
Yeah.
But where Peter has gone and is living is within sight of Etna, but south of Etna, in a very, very particular place on soils that don't exist anywhere else. And this is where he's making the wine that I've been enjoying. And I just want to, people might have said, what is that Hugh is swinging? And may I just show you what it is, because it is Peter's current masterpiece.
Very, very lovely. No, it is.
Monte Carubo is the name of the property. Vignolo is the name of the vineyard. The wine is 100%, or nearly 100% Syrah. There's nothing else like it in Sicily, or may I say Italy, or anywhere on earth, really. It is my beautiful, beautiful interpretation of Syrah with the Sicilian touch, which frankly only Peter could have done.
And if I'm going to be commercial for a moment, it's going to be on these shores in the next 2 or 3 weeks. But there's a very great question on that subject from a good friend of all of us, Fiona Chempon, who I first met in Singapore when she barged into a serious dinner that I was trying to do with Lafleur, Petrus and something else. And we did a sort of double act, which went on and on. It was fantastic. Anyway, she owns Chateau Le Pin, among many other things, and is a merchant and a writer and an inspirational person. And she asked a rather interesting question. She says, "Great to ask Peter, how come it is Syrah rather than Nero d'Avalo, which of course is the indigenous Sicilian grape, that is the predominant grape at Monte Carubo? So why did you go for Syrah rather than Nero d'Avalo?" And you have to be quick, Peter, because you can just say because Nero is rubbish. That'll do perfectly well, or whatever. But
Nero is really it's a grape that wouldn't exist in France. They would have thrown it away years ago. But here it exists because it was the grape for coupage. So they used it. That makes very strong wines, and those wines they would send up to the north where they would be blended. I suppose even sometimes right up to, I dare say it, Bordeaux, in the old days, to help a weak year. It makes bitter wines, very heavy wines, clumsy wines, in my opinion. I like elegant wines. That must be 25 years in Bordeaux and a whole childhood behind me that has led to that point. The Syrah has been in Sicily for over 200 years, which not many people realize. And so, as nobody really were interested in the vineyard thing, I got a fresh Syrah from the Hermitage Massal selection, and it makes absolutely stunning wines. And I am on an old volcano that exploded 2 million years ago, and so the soil here is remarkable.
Excellent. Okay, well then that's a brilliant response. And then there was one from Nikolai Navrazov, who said Chateau Carsin in Cadillac makes an amazing Sauvignon Gris, picking up on what Hugh was talking about earlier.
Yes.
And Julia Berglund always speaks of you fondly. Have you tasted their wines recently?
Not recently, unfortunately. I found an old bottle, and I sent a message to Juha, said, "Dear Juha, I've just had a bottle of your wine, which I found in the cellar. And my God, so nice to see you could keep for all those years." And he answered back and said, "You made it." I'd totally forgotten.
Brilliant. Love it, love it, love it. And then another really interesting question, it sort of dovetails in to the one that I was going to ask you about, who are your heroes. And this is from one of your Landiras stagiaires, and he said, "Who's the best winemaker you have ever worked with?"
Ever worked with? You know, I'm so bad at working with people, but I do admire the wines from Ozon, I must say. I think they come very close to perfection. I love the wines of my nephew Ping makes, Alvaro Balaccio. I love those wines. And if this is going to be quite controversial, of course, but I wonder what position they would have had in the world if it hadn't been for Bordeaux being so expensive. Because all of a sudden people had to find substitutes, and then unfortunately these wines became very expensive as well. But would anybody ever have considered a wine apart from Bigger Sicilia from Spain 30 years ago? I don't think so.
Yeah. But Peter, you're being modest, because actually one of the principal reasons why that wines are now drunk and valued so highly is because you introduced them to us and many other people around the world. So it's actually your fault, and it's probably your fault that they're so expensive now. So entirely your fault. But you are the great. This is, I think, one of your special qualities is that you become the champion of people and things that are unknown and should not be unknown, either because they've fallen into disuse or abeyance, or were once great and then got lost and then became great thanks to the efforts of people, and then you bring them on. I think it's an extraordinary quality. I think there are probably quite more questions coming through. Oh yeah, what do you think of Sauvignon Vert? Heavens, I didn't know there was a Sauvignon Vert. You see how ignorant I am.
That's Sauvignon.
Apparently it's in Friuli.
It's the one that's called Sauvignonasse, isn't it?
Ah, right, okay.
Nobody admits to using it.
No.
I'm sorry, I don't come around very much. I don't see very many things from that. That one I haven't seen. Must be a big fault of mine. there must be some grapes I have never heard of. I'm not a great fan of Sauvignon Blanc outside the Sancerre, I may say.
No, I think that's true. And there's another extraordinary question, which I think is brilliant, is with such an extensive number of terroirs and wine produced, do you feel that there are any stones unturned? Is there any one place or one varietal where you think that, where you would, if you were, I don't know, 50 years younger, 10 years younger?
Yes.
How would you want to plant your flag in? Because you've planted your flag in, so as Hugh was saying, there's so many parts of the world.
Yes.
And with such brilliant effect. Is there a stone unturned?
But it's a challenge. No, it's a very old stone. I would have loved to make a wine in Burgundy.
Ah.
But there's absolutely no chance of that. No, I'm sure there are places. China is very exciting. If I was younger, and China would be different, then I would probably have loved to go there. Right at the beginning, I thought very much about becoming a tea planter. And I think the Chinese have this wonderful gift of knowing taste much more than many other people, because they have these marvelous kitchens. They cook like dreams, and then of course they have the knowledge of flavors through their teas and so on. And I've always found that it was such a joy. For instance, N.K. Young in Singapore, it was such a joy being with him, because he had a profound understanding of what wine was about.
Yeah.
So China, yes, that would have been a great challenge.
There's no reason to think, mind you, that all the world's possible vineyards have been planted yet.
No, I don't think they have. Coming here, there's never been a vineyard here before. It was surely, when we saw the soil, old volcanic soil, lots of oxygen in the soil, feeling the strengths coming out of this place, and then the view onto the Ionian Sea, the cool breeze, the difference in day temperature and night temperature of 10 degrees, all adds up. And then, of course, being on calcaire, being on lime, all adds up to a rather impressive project.
Lest anyone should think that Sicilian wine is big, hearty red stuff. The wine that I'm sipping with huge pleasure is, as Peter just said, he loves elegant wine. And although elegant is a very overused, it somehow hits the spot with this. It's very graceful. It's light on its feet, but hugely convincing, and goes on and on. You can't help watching it retreat. It's a love, and if this is what some part of Sicily.
Yes. There are so many interesting old varieties here, which have a big future. Many of them have a DNA of 3,000 years, and there's a collection of them at the experimental station in Marsala. I've got great friends there, and we taste some of their experimental wines. Some of these old varieties are really beautiful, make wonderful wines, and they never get higher than 11.5, maximum 12 degrees. And that is in this climate. So I think it's here we should look towards the vines in future, because we don't get the high alcohol with them. No. And this is really something I think revolutionary. And it should be looked into. But everybody is so occupied planting their Nero d'Avola because some godforsaken American journalist got drunk on it once and thought it was.
I want to ask Adam a question here.
Yes.
Some people say that the fashion for great big blockbuster wines is over and done,
Yeah.
and that people are looking for lower alcohol degrees and more light-footed wines and so on.
Yes.
Did you find that? Is that your experience as well?
Yeah, I think, I mean, there's no doubt that the influence for that was as Peter said, it was American led, and particularly somebody that we all admired enormously, Robert Parker. And that was fine as long as you deflected your taste according to what you knew his tastes were, and found something else. So there was almost a sort of a matrix that which wasn't liked by Parker was going to be liked by somebody else for precisely the reasons that he didn't like it. And I remember Christian Muex saying 25 years ago that he felt that he was the sort of last classical school alive in Bordeaux at the time when all of these big wines were coming through for reasons that we all know about. And I remember saying that by law of the cycle alone, that will come back. That desire for a degree of freshness, wanting to drink a bottle rather than a glass because you could, without any effect, and a wine that you could drink rather than have to taste. And I always think that's the great difference. You know, wines that taste well are so often wines that do not drink well, and particularly when it's in the white heat of competition. You can taste wines which hit you between the eyes and you think, whoa, that's amazing. And then you have half a bottle of it and you're sort of flat on the floor. So I think there is this, which I suspect also is why Burgundy, picking up on what Peter was saying, has also exerted its influence, not because of the sort of monoculture aspect, a sense of place which is very marked and very strong, but also because there's a lightness of touch there, and yet also an inner strength, which is fascinating. You have been asked whether or not they made wines in there was a question that came through in Denmark. I didn't know that was possible, but you were going to tell me that there are some profoundly great wines in Denmark.
There are.
There
A
are.
friend of ours who just planted some Pinot Noir, believe it or not. The Danes are strong believers in the global warming. So they think they can begin to make Burgundy there next week. But I find that the sort of spumantes they do, they're not bad at all, actually. I've had one or two rather nice ones. I mean,
yeah. Okay. Well, that's good. I'm being encouraged to wrap up, which is such a shame because we could go on and on and on, and it's been, you know, thanks to Hugh, the most fantastic hour, which is gone for me in about 3 minutes. And the fact is that nobody's left. In fact, more people have been arriving during this last hour, which is, I think, a tribute to you, Peter. But if I could ask one last question before I get going to sign off with this wonderful book. What do you think? What do you see as your legacy? Briefly, very briefly. You're too modest to answer it, I know, but I'm going to ask it anyway.
I don't know. Finding that every vineyard had its own yeast was, I think, something I'm very happy about. It was just an observation, of course.
Yeah,
but it was there, and nobody believed it.
Well, I couldn't agree more. It was a revolutionary, it was a groundbreaking discovery, and you described it so well. And I will, if I may, steal a Hugh's idea, which is nothing new because he always comes up with the ideas, and I just follow in his footsteps. But just to say a few lines to wrap up on this book, which really is such a lovely read about you. And I was very kindly by you, very sweetly asked to write something, and I called you a restless innovator, which sounds like some sort of garden machine. But on a more serious note, I said if I was asked to define Peter's character, I would suggest that he encapsulates more than anyone else I know Émile Peynaud's famous quotation: "Tradition is simply an experiment that has succeeded. I find it wondrous that Peter, rooted in and hugely respective of tradition, should nevertheless have spent more time creating new traditions and encouraging others, both family and friends, to do the same in every corner of the winemaking world. He is a most remarkable man. And I think that sort of, in my tiny way, is my contribution to you as the most remarkable man. But the book it's got so many pictures. I love pictures. It's pathetic. There are some wonderful photographs, thousands of them, of people, friends, and great people in the world of wine. And as I said, the book is about listening to you talking, and I can't really put it better than that. Hugh, thank you so much for hosting this, and I know you two go back a long, long, long way, and it's been a privilege to listen to both of you. And Peter, a star, and thank you so much. And thank you all for being with us this evening. And I'm going to finish by raising a glass of your lovely wine, Peter, and thank you, Hugh. And thank you to all of you for coming and being with us this evening.
Thank you,
Good
Adam.
luck, Godspeed.